All right, as we reflect on the news of Congressman Conyers passing away, obviously the end of his career ended much differently than the way it began and what he is being remembered for now, Nolan.
Yeah, I mean, when he started, he was a trailblazer. He went down to Washington as one of the few African-American members. There was no black caucus when he got there. He had to start one. And, you know, throughout his career, his passion was to, or mission was to make sure African Americans had a voice in the halls of power and to give them political standing. I think he accomplished that very, very well. I mean, he was the ranking member or chairman of the Judiciary Committee for a long time, very powerful position in Washington, gave George W. Bush hell during his tenure, advocated for universal health care, reparations, a lot of ideas that were way out of the mainstream when he first brought them to the table that are now being embraced as the Democratic Party takes that hard turn left. I mean, they're sounding more and more like John Conyers of 20 years ago, but as you mentioned, his career took a bad turn.
Do you think that we're going to see longevity like that in terms of people serving in Congress from this area anymore?
53 years? I don't know. I think that's probably an era that's passed us by. But as Nolan says, you know, there's always this question about whether people stay too long and whether they can maintain their effectiveness over that time. I think the way to look at Conyers' career is not just as a sitting member of the House of Representatives, but the way that he leveraged that seat to draw attention to other kinds of issues. And so, I mean, there are many different types of people in Congress, and they all use it a little differently. His most important work in the last 20 years, at least, was really about the things that he was out talking about, the things that he was introducing that were out of the mainstream, and trying to move things really slowly toward his direction. And if you think about it, the discussion about reparations that's going on today is absolutely reflective of where John Conyers was for many, many decades before. The healthcare debate that we're having today, as Nolan points out, was heavily influenced by his thinking as well. That's not stuff that he did as a voting, you know, through votes or introducing bills so much as staying on the subject, using that seat as leverage for those things that he cared about, and influencing people in ways that they may not even have been aware.
Is that what, if you are someone who is in politics and looking to kind of grow through leadership, if you're new in Congress or even aspiring to that kind of office, is that something that you take from him? Do you look back at John Conyers' career and say, those are the things that I want to take?
First half again.
Yeah.
But I would agree with Steve. He did stay too long, and too many in Congress stay too long. They can't let go. And, you know, John Conyers, as happens to folks who stay there in Washington too long, he became part of the system, if you will. He became part of the swamp. He felt, you know, he began to feel like he was entitled to something more. You know, he was a subject of 2, 3 ethics investigations, and then in the end, caught up in a very ugly Me Too scandal involving sexual harassment with members of his staff. I think when you go to Congress, the lesson here is set your expectations. I'm going to be here 10 years or 15 or 20. 40, 50 years might be a little too long.
Yeah,
So you're saying term limit yourself a little bit.
Yeah, I would not call John Conyers a member of the swamp. I would not say that he's somebody who was a part of the things we need to quote unquote fix in Washington. This was a guy who was
became
really
self-serving.
Well, but this is a guy who was very dedicated to the end to the causes that he started out with. And if you think about,
no question about
if
that.
You think about
the power
so
corrupts.
the bill that he introduced every year to have the United States at least sit down and think about the idea of reparations. And he did that up until the very last year of his career. That is an indication of the kind of influence that he had. No one was talking about this issue 5 years ago, let alone 10 or 20. It was his persistence in that issue.
There's no doubt about that.
And
I
agree.
You don't
that,
erase his accomplishments, but
I agree. He
as,
probably stayed too long.
as
I think he
happens,
was part
you
of the
stay
problem.
too long, you get the feeling that maybe the rules don't apply to you, or you can get away with some things that you might not have done your first 20 years. And, you know, I think we've seen that over and over again.
Well, let's talk a little bit about power and elections and who's coming up. We are about a year away now from election 2020, and we saw Bernie Sanders was in town last weekend. Rashida Tlaib endorsed him. Give us a big picture sense of where Michigan stands in this next year and the importance of the voters in our state.
Well, we're not that far away from Michigan's impact. I think we vote early March.
In the primary,
We're
yeah.
3-4 months away, just a couple of months away from the January primaries, the early primaries in Iowa and New Hampshire. I mean, this thing's right on us. And you still have a lot of discussion, I think, about who else might get in. And this is so typical in every Democratic campaign I've ever covered, whether it's state level or the federal level. You know, they get down to near the end and they start looking at their candidates. I mean, it happened in the Michigan governor's race last time. So I think this field is set. I don't expect anybody else to get in. And if I'm looking at it, I think in Michigan, just as in 2016, Bernie Sanders will have the edge here.
In a different direction.
She's saying she's going to split that vote.
Well,
that
I don't know
side
that
of the
she's.
vote.
I think the polls suggest she's not splitting it. She's taking it. She's doing better than he is in a lot of polls right now, and she's the one who seems to have momentum. I think in some ways the question is which of them will represent that wing of the party and that kind of thinking in the late primaries, right? And that'll depend on how they do in places like New Hampshire and Iowa, but also here in Michigan.
Well, there's no question if one or the other would get out, the remaining person would probably win the nomination as long as the field remains fairly chunky, if you will. But I don't see either one of them. I mean, Bernie proved last time around he'll hang on to the very last gasp, and Elizabeth Warren's not getting out.
He will. So explain to people, though, why Michigan factors so importantly in the large picture of looking at the U.S.
Well, I mean, it's as it always was. There's a good chunk of delegates out of Michigan and electoral votes for the general election. It's a representative state. It probably looks more like the nation than a lot of other states do, and it is still, as it proved in 2016, can go any way. So either way, so it's not necessarily predictable.
I think it's not so much Michigan as it is Southeast Michigan that's sort of indicative of the national push and pull. You had these overvotes in Macomb County for Donald Trump last time. If he can maintain that this time, that'll give him a push. I don't see any reason that those voters will vote for someone else. They may stay home because I think they've been somewhat disappointed by him. The opposite end of that question is, what's the turnout look like in Detroit? You had 20,000 Detroiters who showed up in 2012, not repeat in 2016. If they had, Hillary Clinton likely wins the state.
Well, who can bring out Detroit voters?
Well, that's the question in the Democratic primaries, I think, is which of those candidates gets Detroiters excited the way that Barack Obama
All right, so
did.
take a guess.
Well, I mean, I think Warren is probably one of the ways to do that. But Biden, of course, is more connected with black voters in the polls than the other candidates are, and that's because I think he's connected with Barack Obama, who got black voters more excited than they ever
All
had.
right, last word on this, Nolan.
I think black voters go to Biden, older voters go to Biden. But I still think Bernie wins.
But in the general, I think the question is in the general, if Warren is the candidate, can she pull out black voters?
I don't think so.
In November. I don't know.
I don't think so.
We've got a couple months to at least hash that out. All right, we'll see. All right, you guys, stay right here.